Okay. Tonight is January the 20th, 2018. Tonight there is a super blood wolf moon, which is apparently a real thing. Let's see. Read a bit about it.
A lunar eclipse.
How to hell with you. I hate it when websites autoplay video. Okay, according to CNN, the moon is perfectly in perfect alignment with the sun and the earth. The moon on the opposite side of the earth from the sun. The earth will cast two shadows on the moon during the eclipse. The penumbra is the partial outer shadow, and the umbra is the full dark shadow. When the full moon moves into Earth's shadow, it will darken, but it won't disappear. Sunlight passing through Earth's atmosphere will light the moon in a dramatic fashion, turning it red. Each moon has its own name associated with the full moon. In January, it is known as the wolf moon, inspired by hungry wolves that howled outside of villages long ago, according to the Old Farmer's Almanac. It sounds very exciting. What it really means is that the moon is pretty big, and also it's kind of dark. It might appear copper or reddish depending on where you are. It is quite large outside, which is nice, I guess. Okay. Well, I guess I'll just get straight to reading. Might be a little off tonight, maybe a little slower than normal. For one thing, I just woke up from a nap, which is very nice. But I'm also not quite at 100%, at least not yet. I feel great though, just a little groggy. And also, my ceiling light went out, and because I am really lazy, I didn't bother changing it out, even though it happened a couple days ago. So in order to read, I have to use my phone light, which means that I'm using both hands to read instead of just one, because I need to use my phone light to look at the actual book, while also holding that open with my free hand. Last week, I think Kimmery brought it up first that she wanted me to read The Turnip. I'm just going to go ahead and start reading because there's only one other person on stream. I won't read The Turnip at first, but I'll find something. Let's see here. We read The Glass Coffin, which is very well written. A lot of stories involving wolves, like The Wolf and the Seven Little Kids, The Wolf and the Fox, The Wolf and the Man, Gossip Wolf and the Fox. I think I might read one of those in celebration of the super blood wolf moon. It's such a great phrase for something that's ostensibly just a really big moon. As I recall, another one of these super blood wolf moons won't be happening until 2020, I think. I'm going to try reading The Wolf and the Seven Little Kids, at least to start off with. It's on page 134. I don't know anything about this story. Okay. The Wolf and the Seven Little Kids. There was once on a time an old goat who had 7 little kids, and loved them with all the love of a mother and her children. One day she wanted to go into the forest and fetch some food. So she called all 7 to her and said, "Dear children, I have to go into the forest, but be on your guard against the wolf. If he comes in, he will devour you all, skin, hair, and all. The wretch often disguises himself, but you will know him at once by his rough voice and his black feet." The kid said, "Dear mother, we will take good care of ourselves. You may go away without any anxiety." Then the old one bleated, and went on her way with an easy mind. It was not long before someone knocked at the house door and cried, "Open the door, dear children. Your mother is here, and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the little kids knew it was the wolf by the rough voice. "We will not open the door," cried they. "You are not our mother. She has a soft, pleasant voice, but your voice is rough. You are the wolf." The wolf went away to a shopkeeper and bought himself a great lump of chalk, ate this, and made his voice soft with it. Then he came back, knocked at the door of the house, and cried, "Open the door, dear children. Your mother is here, and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the wolf had laid his black paws against the window, and the children saw them and cried, "We will not open the door. Our mother has not black feet like you. You are the wolf." And the wolf ran to a baker and said, "I have hurt my feet. Rub some dough over them for me." Yeah, okay, just waste precious dough on this stupid wolf and his filthy feet. When the baker had rubbed his feet all over, he ran to the miller and said, "Strew some white meal over my feet for me." The miller thought to himself, "The wolf wants to deceive someone," and refused. But the wolf said, "If you will not do it, I will devour you." Then the miller was afraid, and made his paws white for him. Now the wretch went for the 3rd time to the house door, knocked at it, and said, "Open the door for me, dear children. Your dear little mother has come back home, and has brought every one of you something back from the forest with her." The little kids cried, "First show us your paws, that we may know—" Okay, first of all, you idiots, if she has paws, it's not going to be your mom. Why are kids so stupid? Okay, then he put his paws in through the window, and when the kids saw that they were white, they believed that all they said was true, and opened the door. Who should come in but the wolf? Yeah, surprise. "Mother, what happened to your hooves?" "Ah, it is just as well." They were terrified and wanted to hide themselves. One sprang under the table, the second into the bed, the third into the stove. Yeah, that'll really help you, you moron. The fourth into the kitchen. Wait a minute, is the stove not into the kitchen? Is that why those... Whatever. The fifth into the cupboard, the sixth under the washing bowl, and the seventh into the clock case. But the wolf found them all, and used no great ceremony. One after the other he swallowed them down his throat. The youngest in the clock case was the only one he did not find. When the wolf had satisfied his appetite, he took himself off, laid himself down under a tree in the green meadow outside, and began to sleep. Soon afterward the old goat came home from the forest again. Ah, what a sight she saw there! The house door stood wide open. The table, chairs, and benches were thrown down. The washing bowl lay broken in pieces, and the quills and pillows were pulled off the bed. She sought her children, but they were nowhere to be found. She called them one after another by name, but no one answered. At last, when she came to the youngest, a soft voice cried, "Dear mother, I am in the clock case." She took the kid out, and it told her that the wolf had come and eaten all the others. Then you may imagine how she wept over her poor children. At length in her grief she went out, and the youngest kid ran with her. When they came to the meadow, there lay the wolf by the tree, and snored so loud that the branches shook. She looked at him on every side, and saw that something was moving and struggling in his gorged body. "Ah, heavens!" said she, "is it possible that my poor children, whom he has swallowed down for his supper, can still be alive?" Then the kid had to run home and fetch scissors, and a needle and thread, and the goat cut open the monster's stomach, and hardly had she made one cut than one little kid had thrust its head out. And when she had cut farther, all 6 sprang out one after the other, and all were still alive, without injury whatsoever. Oh, well, that's convenient, for in his greediness the monster had swallowed them down whole. What rejoicing there was! Then they embraced their dear mother and jumped like a tailor at his... What? Jumped like a tailor? What kind of metaphor is that? They jumped like a tailor at his wedding. Do, is that a thing? Do tailors jump? Whatever. The mother, however, said, "Now go and look for some big stones. We will fill the wicked beast's stomach with them while he is still asleep." Then the 7 kids dragged the stones thither with all speed, and put as many of them in his stomach as they could fit. And the mother sewed him up again in the greatest haste, so that he was not aware of anything, and never once stirred. When the wolf at length had his sleep out, he got on his legs, and as the stones in his stomach made him very thirsty, he wanted to get to a well to drink. But when he began to walk and to move about, the stones in his stomach knocked each other about and rattled. Then cried he, "What rumbles and tumbles against my poor bones? I thought 'twas 6 kids, but it's not but big stones." And when he got to the well and stooped over the water and was just about to drink, the heavy stones made him fall in, and there was no help, but he had to drown miserably. When the 7 kids saw that, they came running to the spot and cried aloud, "The wolf is dead! The wolf is dead!" and danced for joy round about the well with their mother. Uh, all right, that's, great story to tell your kids. That's that's so stupid. I know it's a fable. I know it's a fairy tale. I know that, it's not going to be realistic, but if you're seeing a paw, it's not your mom because she's a goat. Stupid. Whatever. To answer your question, Shelby, I actually did go see the moon. It is very nice. It's right outside my stairwell, conveniently. But anyway, so that was that story. I feel like I actually have heard that one before, just because the whole thing about uh, sewing stones inside of a wolf sounds really familiar. Guess German kids are hardcore. Anyway, so people are here now. I guess I'll just go ahead and read that story, the turnip. This better be good because you're hyping it up a whole lot. That's on page 577. Hello, Kimmery. Thank you for joining the stream again. It's you and your bad puns. It's kind of redundant, though. I mean, if it's a pun, it's gonna be bad. Oh, tails of snakes. I thought that said tunnel of snakes, and I was like, yeah, man, tunnel snakes rule. But no. Okay, here's the turnip. I don't know anything about this story, but I keep getting pestered to do it, so here we go. There were once 2 brothers who both served as soldiers. One of them was rich and the other poor. The poor one, to escape from his poverty, put off his soldier's cloak and turned farmer. He dug and hoed his bit of land and sowed it with turnip seed. The seed came up, and one turnip grew, there which became large and vigorous, and visibly grew bigger and bigger, and seemed as if it would never stop growing, so that it might have been called the Princess of Turnips. All right. For never was such a one seen before, and never will one such be seen again. It finally became so enormous that it filled a whole cart, and 2 oxen were required to draw it, and the farmer had not the least idea what he was about to do with the turnip, or whether it would be a fortune to him or a misfortune. At last he said, "If I sell it, what will I get for it? If I eat it myself, why, the small turnips would taste just as good. It would be better to take it to the king, and make him a present of it." So he placed it on a cart, harnessed 2 oxen, took it to the palace, and presented it to the king. "A strange thing this is," said the king. "Many wonderful things have come before my eyes, but never such a monster as this. From what scene can this have sprung? Or are you a luck child and have met with it by chance?" "Ah, no, no luck child am I," said the farmer. "I am a poor soldier. who because he could no longer support himself hung his soldier's cloak on a nail and took to farming land. I have a brother who is rich and well known to you, Lord King, but I, because I have nothing, am forgotten by everyone. Then the king felt compassion for him, and said, You shall be raised from poverty, and shall have such gifts from me that you shall be equal to your rich brother. Then he bestowed on him much gold, and lands, and meadows, and herds, and made him immensely rich, so that the wealth of the other brother could not be compared with his. When the rich brother heard what the poor one had gained for himself with a single turnip, he envied him, and thought in every way how he could ever get a hold of a similar piece of luck. He would, however, set about it in a much wiser way, and took gold and horses and carried them to the king, and made certain the king would give him a much larger present in return. If his brother had gotten so much for one turnip, what would he not carry away with him in return for such beautiful things as these? The king accepted his present, and said he had nothing to give him in return that was more rare and excellent than that great turnip. So the rich man was obliged to put his brother's turnip in a cart, and have it taken to his home. When there he did not know on whom to vent his rage and anger, until bad thoughts came to him, and he resolved to kill his brother. He hired murderers, who were to lie in ambush, and then he went to his brother and said, Dear brother, I know of a hidden treasure. We will dig it up together and divide it between us. The other agreed to this, and accompanied him without suspicion. While they were on their way, however, the murderers fell on him, bound him, and would have hanged him to a tree. But just as they were doing this, loud singing and the sound of a horse's feet were heard in the distance. On this their hearts were filled with terror, and they pushed their prisoner head first into the sack, hung it on a branch, and took to flight. He, however, worked up there until he had made a hole in the sack, in which through he could put his head. And the man who was coming by was none other than a traveling student, a young fellow who rode on his way through the wood joyously singing his song. When he who was aloft saw that there was one passing below him, he cried, Good day, you have come at a lucky time. The student looked around on every side, but did not know whence the voice came. At last he said, Who calls me? Then an answer came from the top of the tree. Raise your eyes. Here I sit aloft in the sack of wisdom. In a short time have I learned great things. Compared with this, all schools are a jest. In a very short time I shall have learned everything, and shall descend wiser than all other men. I understand the stars, and the signs of the zodiac, and the tracks of the wind, and the sands of the sea, the healing of the illness, the virtues of all herbs, birds, and stones. If you were once within it, you would feel what noble things issue forth from the sack of knowledge. The student, when he heard all this, was astonished, and said, Blessed be the hour in which I have found you. May not I also enter in the sack for a while? He who was above replied as if unwillingly, For a short time I will let you get into it, if you reward me with a few and give me good words. But you must wait an hour longer, for one thing remains which I must learn before I do it. When the student had awaited a while, he became impatient, and begged to be allowed to get in at once. His thirst for knowledge was so very great. So he who was above pretended to at last yield, and said, In order that I might come from the house of knowledge, you must let it down by the rope. Then you shall enter it. So the student let the sack down, untied it, set him free, and cried, Now draw me up at once, and was about to get into the sack. Halt, said the other, that won't do, and took him by the head, and put him upside down into the sack, fastened it, and drew the disciple of wisdom up to the tree by the rope. Then he swung him in the air, and said, How goes it with you, my dear fellow? Behold, already you feel wisdom coming, and you are gaining valuable experience. Keep perfectly quiet until you become wiser. Thereupon he mounted the student's horse and ran away. But in an hour's time, someone to let the student out again. What? I don't understand any of that. I feel like the pages are stuck together, but no, that's how the story goes. What just happened? Okay, so he hired murderers. They're like, hey, we've got a treasure. And then murderers fell on him and would have hanged him. But then someone was coming. So they hung him in a sack from a tree. And then instead of being like, hey, these guys tried to kill me, can you help me down? He's like plays a trick on the other guy? Is there a moral to this story? That is so weird. It's almost like when someone's telling you a story and then they just go off on a tangent and you have no idea what they're talking about. And like they start off talking about that big turnip they made and then they end up talking about this guy they found in the woods. I think you need a better book. Is that how that story is supposed to go? I'm gonna look that up. The Turnip Brothers Grimm. What? Is that really the story? I guess. Yeah, it ends the same way in a different source. Well, I can see why you wanted to read it. Ugh. Well, no one will accuse these stories of being boring, at least. Listen, maybe. I just don't even know. Is that how it's supposed to go? Right. I get that. But why did he have to trick him? Why couldn't he just be like, "Hey, some guys like ambushed me. Can you help me down?" Like, is that really so difficult to explain? It's like an anime where you have like you can't just do something, you have to trick someone into doing it. It was so unnecessary. It's not even like somebody else passed by and he was like, "Hey, I need to come down." And they're like, "Ha, you're trying to rob me," and then they ran off. So instead he's like, "Well, I guess I have to trick the next guy that comes along." She's like, "Well, I'm gonna trick this guy for like no reason." Anyways, good game. Any other requests? I'm gonna look at. I don't have any other stories, and uh, I don't have any other specific stories I was thinking of. There is one other one. It's not in the book. I don't know how good it is. Called Katie Woodencloak, which is sort of like a Cinderella, but a different version. Yeah, it says here it's the Norwegian version of Cinderella. It's gonna be pretty predictable, but I am a little curious. My Sunday was okay. Um, Also, Shelby, you can post in the YouTube chat, like that way people don't just assume I'm making up questions to ask myself. But yeah, my Sunday was okay. I woke up this morning to a text from my dad. I guess like at like 3 a.m. he was having this really intense pain. So he went to the hospital and it turns out he's got pancreatitis. Uh, he's okay now, but I guess like it was like he said it's like the worst pain he's ever had. He's on morphine now, but I guess how they're treating it is they're just starving him for like 2 days. They're just gonna keep him on like an IV drip, and I guess that's gonna keep him alive. That's rough, but I think he's doing okay. At first, it was his wife that texts us, um, but then later on in the day, he started texting us. He's in pretty good humor, making jokes and stuff. But Thank you, Shelby. That's very nice. But yeah, like I said, he's doing all right now. Just pain management and no eating. But holy moly. Okay, I said I was thinking about reading Katie Woodencloak, which, like I said, is a Norwegian version of Cinderella. But according to this website, it's like 27-minute read. So maybe not. Especially considering that it's just another version of Cinderella. We all know the story, right? I guess I could also read. I do have a lot of Grimm fairy tales, some of which make more sense than others. Read the spindle and the shuttle and the needle. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can find that in the book. I guess I could just look it up. That way I don't have to. Um, that way I don't have to just find it in the book. Why don't you like Cinderella, Shelby? You like Sleeping Beauty, don't you? My book is not the same as yours, Kimmery. Although I will look and see what page 564 is just for fun. I know they're not the same story, but why are you picky about one and not the other? Oh, page 564 is a really short story. It's contained on one page called The Shepherd Boy. Just for fun, I'm going to read that one first. Okay. The Shepherd Boy. Once upon a time there was a shepherd boy, whose fame spread far and wide because of the wise answers which he gave to every question. The king of the country heard of it likewise, but did not believe it, and sent for the boy. Then he said to him, "If you can give me an answer to 3 questions which I will ask you, I will look on you as my own child, and you shall dwell with me in my royal palace." The boy said, "What are the 3 questions?" The king said, "The first, how many drops of water are there in the ocean?" The shepherd boy answered, "Lord king, if you will have all the rivers on earth dammed up, so that not a single drop runs from them into the sea until I have counted it, I will tell you how many drops there are in the sea." The king said, "The next question is, how many stars are there in the sky?" And the shepherd boy said, "Give me a great sheet of white paper." Then he made so many fine points on it with a pen they could scarcely be seen, and it was all but impossible to count them. Any one who looked on them would have lost his sight. Then he said, "There are as many stars in the sky as there are points on the paper. Just count them." But no one was able to do it. The king said, "Third question, how many seconds of time are there in eternity?" Then the shepherd boy, "In Lower Pomeranian, the Diamond Mountain, which is 2 miles and a half high, 2 miles and a half wide, 2 miles and a half in depth, every 100 years a little bird comes and sharpens its beak on it, and then the whole mountain is worn away by this, until the first second of eternity shall be over." The king said, "You have answered all the 3 questions like a wise man, and shall there henceforth dwell with me in my royal palace, and I will regard you as my own child." More like wise ass. Well, at least that one was short. Page 423, Kimmery is suggesting. That one is. Oh, pages are stuck together. I mean, he didn't actually answer any of those questions. He was more just like, well, you can't really count it. And he said that like 3 times, and the king's like, yeah, you're a wise guy. Come on. I need you. You're my boy. Page 423 is just halfway through Faithful John, which kind of sounds boring, so I'm not going to read it. I am a little curious about this spindle, shuttle, and needle story, though, so I'm going to read that. Okay. Spindle, shuttle, and needle. Once upon a time, there was a girl whose father... Oh, dang nabbit. It's a problem with reading on a computer. If you press the wrong key, you might end up cutting the story halfway off. Shelby says she just finds Cinderella to be boring. Well, should fit just right on this stream. Anyways, spindle, shuttle, and needle. I'm going to read it this time and not accidentally press the tab key and get myself out of it. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a girl whose father and mother died when she was still a little child. Her grandmother lived all alone at the end of a village, in a little house, and earned her living with spinning, weaving, and sewing. The old woman took the orphan child into service and gave her a pious upbringing. When the girl was 15 years old, the godmother took ill, called the child to her bedside, and said, "My dear daughter, I feel that my end is near. I leave to you this little house that will protect you from wind and weather, and also a spindle, a shuttle, and a needle, with which you can earn your living." She then laid her hands on the girl's head and blessed her, saying, "Keep God in your heart, and it will go well with you." With that she closed her eyes. When she was laid to rest in the earth, the girl walked behind the coffin crying, and paid her last respects. The girl now lived alone in the little house. She was industrious. She span, wove, and sewed, and everything she did was touched by the good woman's blessing. It was as though the flax multiplied itself in her kitchen, and whenever she wove a piece of cloth or carpet, or sewed a shirt, she immediately found a buyer who paid so well that she was never in need, and always had something to share with others. At this time, the king's son was traveling throughout the country in search of a bride. He wanted neither a poor one nor a rich one. He said, "My wife shall be the girl who is at the same time the poorest and the richest." When he came to the village where the girl lived, he asked, as he had done everywhere, who was the richest girl and the poorest girl. First of all, they named for him the richest girl, and then said that the poorest girl was the one who lived in the little house at the end of the village. The rich girl sat on her doorstep in all her finery, and when the prince approached her, she bowed before him. He looked at her, said not a word, and rode on. When he arrived at the poor girl's house, she was not standing in the doorway, but instead was spinning in her little kitchen. She stopped the horse and looked into the window. He stopped the horse and looked into the window, through which the bright sun was shining, and saw the girl, sitting at her spinning wheel and diligently spinning. She looked up, and when she saw the prince looking in, she blushed all over, closed her eyes, and continued to spin. I do not know if the thread was entirely even at this time, but she continued to spin until the prince had ridden away. Then she stepped to the window and opened it, saying, "It is so hot in the kitchen," but she continued to follow him with her eyes as long as she could recognize the white feathers on his hat. The girl sat back down in the kitchen and continued to work at her spinning. Then a saying came to her that the old woman had sometimes said while she was at work, and sang it thus: "Spindle, spindle, go on out, and bring a suitor to my house." What happened? The spindle immediately jumped out of her hand and out the door. Amazed, she stood up and watched as it danced merrily across the field, pulling along a glistening golden thread behind it. But before long it had disappeared from her eyes. Because the girl no longer had a spindle, she picked up her shuttle, seated herself at her loom, and began to weave. Now the spindle danced ever onward. Just as the thread came to an end, it reached the prince. "What do I see?" cried he. "Is this the spindle showing me the way?" He turned his horse around and followed the golden thread back. The girl was seated at her work, singing, "Shuttle, shuttle, weave so fine, lead a suitor here to me." Oh, I was hoping that was gonna rhyme or something. Weave so fine, you blow my mind. Hey, shuttle. Hey, shuttle. Anyways, I promise I won't do that again. Just then, the shuttle jumped out from her hand and out the door. However, it began to weave a carpet before the threshold, a more beautiful one than anyone had ever seen before. At its sides blossomed roses and lilies. In its middle, against a golden background, there were rows of green upon which hares and rabbits were jumping about. In between, stags and deer stuck out their heads. Colorful birds sat above in the branches. The only thing missing was their singing. The shuttle jumped back and forth. It was as though everything was growing by itself. Because her shuttle had run away, the girl now sat down to sew. She held her needle in her hand and sang, "Needle, needle, sharp and fine, clean up the house for this suitor of mine." Then the needle jumped out of her fingers and flew about in the kitchen as quick as lightning. It was as though invisible spirits were at work. The table and benches were soon covered with green cloth, the chairs with velvet, and silk curtains hung at the windows. The needle had scarcely made its last stitch when the girl looked through the window and saw the white feathers on the prince's hat. The spindle had brought him here with its golden thread. He dismounted and walked across the carpet into the house. When he stepped into the kitchen, she was standing there in her simple dress, but she was glowing in it like a rose in a bush. "You are the poorest, but also the richest," he said to her. "Come with me. You shall be my bride." She said nothing, but reached her hand out to him. Then he gave her a kiss and led her outside, lifted her on his horse, and took her to the royal palace where their wedding was celebrated with great joy. The spindle, shuttle, and needle were secured in the treasure chamber, where they were kept in great honor. Ah, see, that's a nice one. I like that one. That's a solid story. Like, it makes sense. It's nice. Is there a way to turn up my mic volume? A little bit. I think the easiest way would be to just speak a little louder, though. What do you think, Kimmery? How does my voice sound? Does it sound okay? Or does it need to be louder? The ending? The ending was that she got married to the prince. It's what happens in every single story. Well, most of them. I'm trying to think. There was one grim story about queen danced to death. Well, I know there was one story I remember where it ends with like the prince's evil mother, like, in order to get revenge on her, he makes her shoes of red hot iron, puts her on her, and then forces her to dance until she dies, which is metal AF. But I don't remember what story it was. Wait, let's see. Snowdrop. That's kind of interesting. So the Brothers Grimm, they didn't necessarily write their stories. A lot of them were just, I didn't even catch that pun. A lot of them were just compiled from folk tales, which is why they're inconsistent. Like how the glass coffin actually sounds like it was written, but in comparison, something else might seem discombobulated and disjointed and strange, because that's how folk tales go. They're not written by writers necessarily, just by people trying to entertain their kids. Anyways, something interesting I never know, according to the Wikipedia article, is that the Brothers Grimm held motherhood to be sacred. So a lot of times, uh, if a mother was mentioned to be evil, they would change her to a stepmother because the actual mother should be a respected thing. Shouldn't necessarily hold your stepmother to be sacred, apparently, but it'd be like that sometimes. Let's see. I wish I could remember what story that was where she dances to death. The red hot shoes. Brother Lustig, it's German for funny. Well, if it's German for funny, then it must be good. Because the Germans are known for their sense of humor. Oh my, this one's not even format. That is a really long read. But you know what? I'm not doing anything else tonight, so maybe I will read it. Okay, so I've got Brother Lustig. Am I pronouncing that right? Probably not. Lustig? I'm not German. I don't speak German. Barely speak English. But that's okay. So if I mispronounce any of this, I'm not sorry. There was one upon a time a great war, and when it came to an end, many soldiers were discharged. Then Brother Lustig also received his dismissal. Lustig? Lustig? Brother Lustig. Brother Lustig also received his dismissal, and with it nothing but a small loaf of ammunition bread. What? Is that exactly what it sounds like? That's Lustig and 4 cruisers? Okay, you know what? I don't know. 4 cruisers and money, with which he departed. St. Peter, however, had placed himself in his way in the form of a poor beggar, and when Brother Lustig came up, he begged alms of him. Brother Lustig replied, "Dear beggar man, what am I to give you? I have been a soldier, and have received my dismissal, and have nothing but this little loaf of Seriously, what is that? And 4 cruisers of money. When that is gone, I shall have to beg as well as you. Still will I give you something." Thereupon he divided the loaf into 4 parts, and gave the apostle one of them, and a cruiser likewise. St. Peter thanked him, went onwards, and threw himself again in the soldier's way as a beggar, but in another shape, and when he begged a gift, and when he came up begged a gift of him as before. Brother Lustig spoke as he had done before, then again gave him a quart of the loaf and one cruiser. St. Peter thanked him, and went onwards, but for the third time placed himself in another shape as a beggar in the road, and spoke to his brother Lustig. Brother Lustig gave him also the 3rd quart of the bread and the 3rd cruiser. St. Peter thanked him, and Brother Lustig went onward, and had but a quarter of the loaf and 1 cruiser. With that he went into an inn, ate the bread, and ordered 1 cruiser's worth of beer. That's how you know the guy is German. When he had it, he journeyed onwards, and then St. Peter, who had assumed the appearance of a discharged soldier, met and spoke to him thus: "Good day, comrade. Can you not give me a bit of bread and a cruiser to get a drink? Where I am to procure it, or where am I to procure it?" answered Brother Lustig. "I have been discharged, and I got nothing but a loaf of ammunition bread and 4 crustics and cruisers of money. I met 3 beggars on the road, and I gave each of them a quarter of my bread and 1 cruiser. Last quarter I ate in the inn, and I had a drink with the last cruiser. Now my pockets are empty, and if you also have nothing we can go a begging together." "No," answered St. Peter, "we need not quite do that. I know a little about medicine, and I will soon earn as much as I require by that." "Indeed," said Brother Lustig, "I know nothing of that, so I must go and beg alone." "Come with me," said St. Peter, "and if I earn anything you shall have half of it." "All right," said Brother Lustig, and they went away together. Then they came to a peasant's house inside. Oh, sorry. This story isn't properly formatted, so it's kind of hard to know exactly how to read it. Then they came to a peasant's house, inside which they heard loud lamentations and crying. They went in, and there the husband was laying sick unto death, and very near his end, and his wife was crying and weeping loudly. "Stop that howling and crying," said St. Peter. "I will make the man well again." And he took a salve out of his pocket and healed the sick man in a moment, so that he could get up and was in perfect health. In great delight the man and his wife said, "How can we reward you? What shall we give you?" But St. Peter would take nothing, and the more the peasant folks offered him, the more he refused. Brother Lustig, however, nudged St. Peter and said, "Take something. Sure enough we are in need of it." At length the woman brought a lamb and said to St. Peter that he really must take it, but he would not. Then Brother Lustig gave him a poke in the side and said, "Do it, take it, you stupid fool. We are in great want of it." Then St. Peter said at last, "Well, I will take the lamb, but I won't carry it. If you insist on having it, you must carry it." "That is nothing," said Brother Lustig. "I will easily carry it," and took it on his shoulder. Then they departed and came to a wood, for Brother Lustig had begun to feel the lamb heavy, and he was hungry. So he said to St. Peter, "Look, that's a good place. We might cook the lamb there and eat it." "As you like," said St. Peter, "but I can't have anything to do with the cooking. If you will cook, there is a kettle for you, and in the meantime I will walk about a little until it is ready. But you must not begin to eat until I have come back. I will come at the right time." "Well, go then," said Brother Lustig. "I understand cookery. I will manage it." And St. Peter went away, and Brother Lustig killed the lamb, lit the fire, threw the meat into the kettle, and boiled it. When the lamb, however, was not quite ready, and the Apostle Peter had not come back, Brother Lustig took it out of the kettle, cut it up, and found the heart. "That is said to be the best part," said he, and tasted it, but at last he ate it all up. At length St. Peter returned and said, "You may eat the whole of the lamb yourself. I will only have the heart. Give me that." Then Brother Lustig took a knife and fork, and pretended to look anxiously amongst the lamb's flesh, but not to be able to find the heart, and at last he said abruptly, "There is none here." "But where can it be?" said the apostle. "I don't know," replied Brother Lustig. "But look, what fools we are to seek for the lamb's heart, and neither of us to remember that a lamb has no heart." "Oh," said St. Peter, "that is something quite new. Every animal has a heart. Why is the lamb to have none?" "No, be assured, my brother," said Brother Lustig, "that a lamb has no heart. Just consider it seriously, and you will see that it really has none." "Well, it is all right," said St. Peter. "If there is no heart, then I want none of the lamb. You may eat it alone." What I can't eat now I will carry away in my knapsack," said Brother Lustig. And he ate half the lamb, and put the rest in his knapsack. They went farther, and then St. Peter caused a great stream of water to flow right across their path, and they were obliged to pass through it. Said St. Peter, "Do you go first?" "No," said Brother Lustig, "you must go first." And he thought, "If the water is too deep, I will stay behind." Then St. Peter strode through it, and the water just reached to his knee. So Brother Lustig began to go through also. But the water grew deeper and reached to his throat. Then he cried, "Brother, help me!" St. Peter said, "Then will you confess that you have eaten the lamb's heart?" "No," said he, "I have not eaten it." Then the water grew deeper still and rose to his mouth. "Help me, brother," cried the soldier. St. Peter said, "And will you confess that you have eaten the lamb's heart?" "No," he replied, "I have not eaten it." St. Peter, however, would not let him be drowned, but made the water sink and helped him through it. Then they journeyed onwards, and came to a kingdom where they heard that the king's daughter lay sick unto death. "Hi there, brother," said the soldier to St. Peter. "There is a chance for us. If we can heal her, we shall be provided for life." But St. Peter was not half quick enough for him. "Come, lift your legs, my dear brother," he said, "that we might get there in time." But St. Peter walked slower and slower, though Brother Lustig did all he could to drive and push him on. And at last they heard that the princess was dead. "Now we are done for," said Brother Lustig. "That comes of your sleepy way of walking." "Just be quiet," answered St. Peter. "I can do more than cure sick people. I can bring dead ones to life again." "Well, if you can do that," said Brother Lustig, "it's all right, but you should earn at least half the kingdom for us by that." Then they went to the royal palace, where everyone was in great grief. But St. Peter told the king that he would restore his daughter to life. He was taken to her, and said, "Bring me a kettle and some water." And when that was brought, he bade everyone go out, and allowed no one to remain with him but Brother Lustig. Then he cut off the girl's limbs and threw them into the water, lit a fire beneath the kettle, and boiled them. I think that's the opposite of resurrecting a person. I'm not sure, but I think. When the flesh had fallen away from the bones, he took out the beautiful white bones and laid them on a table and arranged them in their natural order. When he had done that, he stepped forward and said 3 times, "In the name of the Holy Trinity, dead woman, rise." And at the 3rd time, the princess arose, living, healthy, and beautiful. Then the king was in the greatest joy, and said to St. Peter, "Ask for your reward." St. Peter's apparently talking to himself. "Ask for your reward. Even if it were half my kingdom, I would give it to you." But St. Peter said, "I want nothing for it." "Oh, you tomfool. You thought Brother Oh, dang nabbit. There's no quote marks on this, so I don't know when someone's talking ends and when it begins. Ugh, whatever. "Oh, you fool," thought Brother Lustig to himself, and nudged his comrade's side, and said, "Don't be stupid. If you have no need of anything, I have." St. Peter, however, would have nothing, but as the king saw that the other would very much like to have something, he ordered his treasurer to fill Brother Lustig's knapsack with gold. Then they went on their way, and when they came to a forest, St. Peter said to Brother Lustig, "Now we will divide the gold." "Yes," he replied, "we will." So St. Peter divided the gold, and divided it into 3 heaps. Brother Lustig thought to himself, "What crazy idea has he got in his head now? He is making 3 shares, and there are only 2 of us." But St. Peter said, "I have divided it exactly. There is 1 share for me, 1 for you, and 1 for him who ate the lamb's heart." And he is really on about that. "Oh, I ate that," replied Brother Lustig, and hastily swept up the gold. You may trust what I say. But how can that be true, said St. Peter, when a lamb has no heart? What, brother? What can you be thinking of? Lambs have hearts like other animals. Why should only they have none? Well, so be it, said St. Peter. Keep the gold to yourself, but I will stay with you no longer. I will go my way alone. As you like, dear brother, answered Brother Lustig. Farewell. Oh my word, the story's like halfway done. Then St. Peter went on a different road, but Brother Lustig thought, it is a good thing that he has taken himself off. He is certainly a strange saint, and he had money enough, but he did not know how to manage it, and squandered it, and gave it away, and when some time had gone by, once more had nothing. Then he arrived in a certain country where he heard that a king's daughter was dead. Ho ho, thought he, that might be a good thing for me. I will bring her to life again, and see that I am paid as I ought to be. So he went to the king, and offered to raise the dead girl to life again. Now the king had heard that a discharged soldier was traveling about and bringing dead persons to life again, and thought that Brother Lustig was the man. But as he had no confidence in him, he consulted his counselors first, who said that he might give it a trial as his daughter was dead. Then Brother Lustig ordered water to be brought to him in a kettle. Oh man, bade everyone go out, cut the limbs off, threw him in the water and lit the fire beneath, just as he had seen St. Peter do. The water began to boil, the flesh fell off, and then he took the bones out and laid them on the table, but he did not know the order in which to lay them, and placed them all wrong and in confusion. Then he stood before them and said, In the name of the most holy Trinity, dead maiden, I bid you arise. And he said this thrice, but the bones did not stir. So he said it thrice more, and also in vain. Confounded girl that you are, get up, cried he, get up, or it shall be the worse for you. When he had said that, St. Peter suddenly appeared in his former shape as a discharged soldier. He entered by the window and said, Godless man, what are you doing? How can the dead maiden arise when you have thrown about her bones in such confusion? Dear brother, I have done everything to the best of my ability, he answered. This once I will help you out of your difficulty. But one thing I tell you, and that is that if you ever undertake anything of this kind again, it will be the worse for you. And also that you must neither demand nor accept the smallest thing from the king for this. Thereupon St. Peter laid the bones in their right order, said to the maiden 3 times, In the name of the most holy Trinity, dead maiden, arise. And the king's daughter arose, healthy and beautiful as before. Then St. Peter went away again by the window, and Brother Lustig was rejoiced to find that all that had passed off so well, but was very much vexed to think that after all he was not to take anything for it. I should just like to know, thought he, what fancy that fellow has got in his head, for what he gives with one hand he takes away with the other. There is no sense whatsoever in it. Then the king offered Brother Lustig whatsoever he wished to have, but he did not dare take anything. However, by hints and cunning, he contrived to make the king order his knapsack to be filled with gold for him, and with that he departed. When he got out, St. Peter was standing by the door, and said, Just look at what a man you are. I did not forbid you take anything. Did I not forbid you take anything? And there you have your knapsack full of gold. How can I help that, answered Brother Lustig, if people will put it in for me? Well, I tell you this, that if ever you set about anything of this kind again, you shall suffer for it. All right, brother, have no fear. Now I have money. Why should I trouble myself with washing bones? Faith, said St. Peter, a long time that gold will last. In order that after this you may never tread in forbidden paths, I will bestow on your knapsack this property, namely, that whatsoever you wish to have inside it shall be there. Farewell, you will now never see me more. Goodbye, said Brother Lustig, and thought to himself, I am very glad that you have taken yourself off, strange fellow. I shall certainly not follow you. But of that magical power which had been bestowed on his knapsack, he thought of no more. Brother Lustig travelled about with his money, and squandered and wasted what he had as before. When at last he had no more than 4 cruisers, he passed by an inn and thought, the money must go, and ordered 3 cruisers. 3 cruisers worth of wine and 1 cruiser's worth of bread for himself. As he was sitting there drinking, the smell of roast goose made its way to his nose. Brother Lustig looked about and peeped, and saw that the host had 2 geese roasting in the oven. Then he remembered that his comrade had said that whatsoever he wished to have in his knapsack should be there, so he said, Oh ho, I must try it with that geese. So he went out and when he was outside the door, he said, "I wish those 2 roasted geese out of the oven and in my knapsack." And when he had said that, he unbuckled it and looked in, and they were inside it. "Ah, that's right. Now I am a made man." And he went away to a meadow and took the roast meat. When he was in the midst of his meal, 2 journeymen came up and looked at the second goose, which was not yet touched, with hungry eyes. Brother Lustig thought to himself, "One is enough for me," and called the 2 men up and said, "Take the goose, and eat it to my health." They thanked him, and went with it to the inn, and ordered themselves a half bottle of wine and a loaf, and took out the goose which had been given them, and began to eat. The hostess saw them, and said to her husband, "Those 2 are eating a goose. Just look and see if it is not one of ours, out of the oven." The landlord ran thither, and behold, the oven was empty. "What!" cried he, "you thievish crew! You want to eat goose as cheap as that? Pay for it this moment, or I will wash you well with green hazel sap." The 2 said, "We are no thieves. A discharged soldier gave us this goose, outside there in the meadow. You shall not throw dust in my eyes that way. The soldier was here, but he went out by the door like an honest fellow. I looked after him myself. You are the thieves and shall pay." But as they could not pay, he took a stick and cudgeled them out of the house. Brother Lustig went his way and came to a place where there was a magnificent castle, and not far from it a wretched inn. He went to the inn and asked for a night's lodging, but the landlord turned him away and said, "There is no more room here. The house is full of noble guests." "It surprises me that they should come to you and not go to that splendid castle," said Brother Lustig. "Ah, indeed," replied the host, "but it is no slight matter to sleep there for a night. No one who has tried it so far has ever come out of it alive." "Brothers have tried it," said Brother Lustig. "I will try it too." "Leave it alone," said the host. "It will cost you your neck." "It won't kill me once," said Brother Lustig. "Just give me the key, some good food, and wine." So the host gave him the key and food and wine. And with this Brother Lustig went into the castle, enjoyed his supper, and at length, as he was sleepy, he lay down on the ground, for there was no bed. He soon fell asleep, but during the night was disturbed by a great noise, and when he awoke he saw 9 ugly devils in the room, who had made a circle, and were dancing around him. Brother Lustig said, "Well, dance as long as you like, but none of you must come too close." But the devils pressed continually nearer to him, and almost stepped on his face with their hideous feet. "Stop, you devils, ghosts," said he, but they behaved still worse. Then Brother Lustig grew angry, and got the leg of a chair, and struck out into the midst of them with it. But 9 devils against 1 soldier was still too many, and when he struck those in front of him, the others seized behind him by the hair, and tore it unmercifully. "Devil! Crews!" cried he, "this is just too much. But just wait. Into my knapsack, all 9 of you." In an instant they were in it, and then he buckled it up and threw it into a corner. After this all was suddenly quiet, and Brother Lustig lay down again, and slept till it was bright day. Then came the innkeeper and the nobleman to whom the castle belonged, to see how he had fared. But when they perceived that he was merry and well, they were astonished, and asked, "Have the spirits done you no harm, then?" "The reason why they have not," answered Brother Lustig, "is because I have got the whole 9 of them in my knapsack. You may once more inhabit your castle quite tranquilly. None of them will ever haunt it again." The nobleman thanked him, made him rich presents, and begged him to remain in his service, and he would provide for him as long as he lived. "No, Brother Lustig, I am used to wandering about. I will travel farther." Then he went away, and entered into his smithy, and laid the knapsack which contained the 9 devils on the anvil, and asked the smith and his apprentices to hammer it. So they smote with their great hammers and with all their strength, and the devils uttered howls which were quite pitiful. When he opened the knapsack after this, 8 of them were dead, but one of which had been lying in a fold of it, which was still alive, slipped out, and went back again to hell. Thereupon Brother Lustig travelled a long time about the world, and those who know can tell many a story of him. But at last he grew old, and thought of his end. So he went to a hermit who was known to be a pious man, and said to him, "I am tired of wandering about. I want now to behave in such a manner that I shall enter into the kingdom of heaven." The hermit replied, "There are 2 roads. One is broad and pleasant, and leads to hell. The other is narrow and rough, and leads to heaven." "I should be a fool," thought Brother Lustig, "if I were to take the narrow, rough road." So he set out, and took the broad and pleasant road, and at length came to a great black door, which was the door of hell. Brother Lustig knocked, and the doorkeeper peeped out to see who was there. But when he saw Brother Lustig he was terrified, for he was the very same 9th devil who had been shut up in the knapsack, and had escaped from it with a black eye. So he pushed the bolt in again as quickly as he could, ran to the highest devil and said, "There is a fellow outside with a knapsack who wants to come in, but as you value your lives, don't allow him in or enter, or he will wish the whole of hell into his knapsack. He once gave me a frightful hammering while I was in it." So they called out to Brother Lustig that he was to go away, for he could not get in there. "If they won't have me here," thought he, "I will see if I can get a place for myself in heaven, for I must stay somewhere." So he turned about and went onwards until he came to the door of heaven, where he knocked. St. Peter was sitting hard by as a doorkeeper. Brother Lustig recognized him at once and thought, "Here I find an old friend. I shall get on the better." But St. Peter said, "I can hardly believe that you want to come into heaven. Let me in, brother. I must get in somewhere. If they would have taken me into hell, I should not have come here." "No," said St. Peter, "you shall not enter. And if you will not let me in, take your knapsack back, for I will have nothing at all from you." "Give it here, then," said St. Peter. And the brothers Lustig gave him the knapsack into heaven through the bars, and St. Peter took it and hung it beside his seat. Then said Brother Lustig, "Now I wish myself inside the knapsack." And in a second he was in it, and in heaven, and St. Peter was forced to let him stay there. Oh, that's a long story. I think that one was like 20 minutes. 20 minutes long, I think. I actually do kind of like it towards the end, although it's a little blasphemous about tricking your way into heaven. It's a nice little folktale, though. It kind of reminds me of old school mythology, where like the hero is impossibly good and impossibly capable of defeating evil beyond what is reasonable. Um, Anyways, I've been reading for about an hour now. My legs are starting to hurt, and I need a drink real bad. So I'm going to take a quick break. Um, don't you go dying on me. Okay. Shelby's saying my stream is really quiet. Are you sure the sound isn't down on your laptop? That might be part of it. I haven't done anything abnormal, as far as I know. Actually, hold on a second. Let me know if you notice a difference in my voice. Yeah, the music is supposed to be quiet. I don't want it like loud and crazy. I am curious though, Shelby. I noticed you actually did get around to playing Binding of Isaac. What do you think of it so far? Any day now. It's okay. Yeah. Yeah, your arrow keys are a little tiny, which might be kind of hard for you. You can rebind them, I think, to like the number pad if it's easier. But I think I mean I don't even know what kind of games you really like, but speaking personally, like I said, I have legitimately put like 400 hours in Binding of Isaac because it is a lot of fun. So once you get used to it, I think you'll like it. At least I do. Um, so I was kind of thinking about folk tales and uh fairy stuff, fairy tales. I was thinking about you are very tired. We all know that, Shelby. I was thinking about a little Russian thing called Ivan the Fool. Ivan the Fool was a stock character, or is, I should say, a stock character in Russian folklore. Stuff like the Brothers Grimm. Not quite Brothers Grimm because they didn't do Russian stuff because they were German, but similar tales from that culture. The typical story of Ivan the Fool was that he was usually the youngest of his brothers, and no one trusted him because he was a fool, obviously. But despite that, when all three brothers, the oldest, the middle, and Ivan himself, were presented with a conundrum, despite being a fool, Ivan would typically come out on top. The story usually meaning to say that uh, the story point is usually that just because he was a fool doesn't mean that he wasn't good or what he did or that he was underestimated. The interesting thing was that according to what I read, the analysis about it, um, even though he was called the fool, the old word that comes from in Russian doesn't necessarily mean the fool, it just means naive, and that it didn't necessarily originally have negative connotations. So the point of the stories was originally that he wasn't a fool at all, just that he was perceived as one, or that he came to be known as a fool. When in actuality, uh, he was actually the brightest and the wisest of his brothers. I did go out during the break to see if I could find the moon. I can't see it. I don't know. I didn't look very hard, but I guess it just went through the. I guess it's just in a position I can't see, and now I'm too lazy to go out and find it. But anyways, so that was just a little thing about Ivan the Fool I thought about. They said that originally the word the fool in Russian did not have negative connotations, and that it only developed that as time went on. Um, anyways, I think I might also try reading some of the Aesop fables. I think it's Aesop. Is it Aesop? Anyways, those are also fables that are really popular. Apparently Shelby is sending me inappropriate pictures over text. Yeah, I've seen, excuse me, I've seen photos of it, of like what it's supposed to look like, but too lazy to go outside, see it for myself. But I was thinking about this one earlier, and I kind of want to read it and talk about it a little bit, because Aesop's Fables, or Aesop, I don't know, Aesop? I don't know how to pronounce it, because Aesop is spelled Aesop, with the AE being uh, one letter, which I'm taking a linguistics class, and they tell us that the lowercase AE, like you see in Encyclopedia Dramatica, is an ah sound. So it's not Aesop, I don't think. I think it would be Aesop, but that's really weird to say. So I say Aesop because that sounds cooler to me. Anyways, this is a really quick story, but I'm going to talk about it because it's actually significant beyond the story itself. I'll talk about that once I'm done. Called The Fox and the Grapes. So a fox one day spied a beautiful branch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from the high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way, so he walked off a short distance and took a running leap at it, only to fall short once again. Again and again he tried, but in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am wearing myself out to get a bunch of sour grapes that are not worth gaping for." And he walked away, very, very scornfully. And then there's a little moral at the end of it. Rather than having to assume or find out for ourselves, it just says at the bottom, there are many who pretend to despise and belittle that which is beyond their reach. Am I ever going to read my Iron Mask story on here? Um, I thought about it. The only problem is that it's not very funny, and I know y'all had a bunch of fun with your nut stains. So I don't know. I would love to do like more humorous stuff because I feel like that's what people want. The only problem is that it's a kind of a catch-22 where if I try to be funny, I'm not. But then if I try to take myself seriously, either people aren't interested or they laugh at me. I don't know. Maybe one day. Kimmery, did Shelby ever make you read that story that I wrote, the short story? I don't even know if she's still on. But while I'm waiting the 20 minutes for the message system to catch up, okay, I don't know. Maybe I will read it. Anyways, Fox and the Grapes. Fox wants to get the grapes, but he can't get to them, so he just says that they're sour grapes and he walks away. This is an old school tale. So there's a thing in psychology called a cognitive dissonance, which is um, it's this idea, cognitive meaning like your brain, your thought, your thinking, and dissonance meaning disharmony, like the opposite of harmony. Essentially saying that your brain is not quite in harmony with your actions. So the idea of the fox and the grapes is that, well, if it's sour grapes, why did he want them to begin with? You know, why was he trying to get them? Why did he make so many attempts to get at them? He only decided they were sour grapes when he couldn't reach them. And so sometimes we say to reflect the story, oh, it's sour grapes, you know, like you were trying to do something and then when you failed at it, you turn bitter against it. Like maybe you ask a girl out and then she turns you down and then so you're like, she's just a whore anyway. That's cognitive dissonance because it's like, well, if she's a whore, why did you want to date her? Well, okay, bad example because that's probably why you would want to date a girl. Point is that sometimes what you want in life, when you can't have it, uh, yeah, it's bitter that way. That's a good way of putting it. But I've for the longest time I had a hard time understanding cognitive dissonance until like I started to think about the story. Essentially, that's what it is that when you can't have what you want and you justify you not having it, excuse me, that's sour grapes. That's cognitive dissonance. He might also refer to it as hypocrisy. Although hypocrisy implies that you actually did something. Like if you were to say, "Oh, I don't even like grapes," but then you actually go and get grapes, that would be hypocrisy. Okay, so that's a bit of fun. Aesop's fables. Um, so you want me to read that story? I like grape soda, like really cheap grape soda for some reason. I don't like higher class stuff. It has to taste cheap. I don't know why. Okay, I warn you though, the story it shouldn't be funny. I don't know, maybe it is. But I wrote a short story. I wrote two actually. Thank you for that, Shelby. I wrote two short stories. Um, one was a story that I haven't showed to anyone about this iron mask, which is used to interrogate people. Not like torture them, but interrogate them through magic means. Yeah, I'm still not satisfied with the first one. I feel like it needs to be redone. But uh when I wrote that story, I was like, well, I'm gonna somehow I came up with the idea that I was gonna come yeah, silence prevails. That was what I called the first story. And I decided that I was going to um that I was going to like come up with a backstory for it because I love writing fantasy, and part of writing fantasy is coming up with backstories and explanations. So I ended up writing this short story, and I was so proud of it that I ended up submitting it to a couple publications. But it naturally it got rejected. The first time I feel like the first time I got rejected because I didn't format it right, because they're very picky. They get a lot of stories, and like if they see that your format isn't right, they just throw it out. They just don't even bother reading it because they don't want to bother with it, which is really dumb. But what can you do? I don't know because they didn't actually give me a reason, so I don't know for sure if that's what it was. But that was for some reason I felt like that was the case. The second time I submitted it, it took them like weeks to actually like send me a rejection letter. And again, they didn't list a reason, which made me wonder like, did they actually read it or I don't know. I mean, it's all speculation, but I feel like the first time they didn't read it, the second time I corrected my thing, and I still don't know if they read it. But so I've got a little short story here. It's just under 3,500 words. I'm gonna time myself to see how long it takes to read, just for fun. Okay, so this story is called Blood, Sweat, and Tears. That day they arose before the sun was up. They had ridden their wagons away across the hills and plains to a reach of the old grin the boy had never seen before. The sun was kissing the horizon by then, and the beauty of early morning light was bathing the incredible trees in gold across white trunks and their deep blue leaves. Each of them was similar to the other, with not a single tree deviating from the family look. And at times, despite the light, the boy could swear there were shadows just outside the corner of his eyes. And in the midst of the grove he sometimes felt he was being watched, though the wood itself was always silent, with nary a step beyond their own making any noise. Even the wind was seldom there. "What is this place, uncle?" young Clain asked. "'Tis a sacred wood, nephew," uncle answered, never looking at the boy as he kept watch on the path and hold on the mule's reins. "These trees are older than any kingdom, though they are ever thin and short." Clain felt himself growing nervous. "Are we permitted to cross through here?" "Any may tread this path. It has neither toll nor gate. Either would be a sin on sacred ground." Of course, that made plenty of sense to the boy, even though his sister had often said he was short on wits. He tried to calm his head, but something in his heart was still nervous. The question appeared in half a whisper before he could think of what he was saying. "But are we permitted to work here?" That was when Uncle looked at his nephew. Nothing in his eye had changed, and right then Clay knew that this had been their destination from the beginning. Uncle had told him they were going to a great place to set up a new forge. That was why they had to bring so many bricks, and the anvil, and a barrel of water. Uncle meant to set up a brand new forge, and where that was there would be no bricks, or anvils, or barrels of water to already use. "No fire is permitted in sacred woods," Uncle said, turning his eyes back to the road. "'Tis an affront." "An affront to what?" Uncle pointed to the treetops with a wagging finger. "To the trees, to the gods, to the spirits that consider this their abode." Clain did not fear trees, nor did he fear gods, but always he hated the idea of spirits, though he had never been sure he had seen a one. His panic grew. "Uncle, are we going to offend the spirits?" "Worry not, nephew. The spirits only awake at night, and if we work fast they shall not have time to put on their ghastly boots before we finish our work and leave." Clain looked around. He was big and strong. He had already learned to shave, and he could wrestle mean goats with his bare hands, and all this though he was not yet called a man. But no strength could save a man from spirits. No fist could beat them, no sword could cut them, no king could command them. Clain hated spirits. Hated them. "Uncle, I will not spend a single night in here." "Nor I," said Uncle. "So we shall hurry our work before we need sleep, else the spirits will break the forge before the second sunrise." Clain nodded, nervous but somewhat relieved, knowing there was something to do which avoided the spirits. "I'll work twice as hard," he whispered to himself. The sun had nearly risen in full beyond the ridge when at last Uncle reined the cart off the path. Its light, though present, was drowned by the thick dark leaves of the trees. Occasional glimmers of golden sunlight would peek out from the foliage, its perfect rays almost dancing with the sway of the trees as the day went on. It was no small relief to work in perfect shade, and Clain made good on his promise to carry and stack bricks better than he ever had in his life. In spite of all the work he even began to smile long before the job was done. Brick by brick, the smelter began to take shape, a crude and boxy thing which offered little dignity, but a smelter nonetheless. Before it was quite done, Uncle sent Clain away. "Nephew, go and bring some kindling for the fire." That was easier work than laying brick, though Clain did not mind either way. But as he walked away from the beginning of their makeshift forge, he noticed something. In his lacking mind, Clain thought carefully about what it was he was seeking as he looked upon the road. His tired mind turned and found no answer until at last the strange thing hit him like a ram. Without thinking of his words, he turned back and shouted to his uncle. "Uncle, there are no branches on the ground." Uncle nearly jumped up from his work to shush the boy from many paces away. "Keep your voice down, boy," he said in a loud whisper. "This is not a work meant to be done here, remember?" Clain's face grew warm with blush. "Sorry," he whispered back. Uncle pointed to the back of the cart where they had gotten the bricks. "Grab yourself a hatchet and cut down some of the lower branches." Clain obeyed with some reluctance. Many questions danced in his sweating mind. Why were there no branches on the ground? Had someone taken them away since they were sacred trees? Or were these trees sacred because they dropped no branch? For that matter, why did Uncle not bring his own branches? As he looked in the back of the cart, he took note of how much room there was to spare. They could have fit a half-dozen faggots in there and still had room left. And as he took the hatchet and climbed back off the cart, he wondered if perhaps that was why they were here in the first place, to use these sacred branches. But what was good about them? What branches got used made no difference. Uncle had told him as such long ago, even before Clain was strong enough to lay bricks. And for that matter, wouldn't fresh-cut branches be too green to burn? Would these branches be green at all if their bark was white and their leaves were blue? Clain, curious with this question, found that it was easy to hack off a low limb from the tree. Looking inside its bark, he saw that the inside of the tree was black as rot, yet it smelled lovely. He had never liked the smell of flowers, but he had always liked the smell of burning wood, and the scent of these trees was not unlike that. He cut down many branches from many different trees, all of them amazingly alike from the inside and out. He brought back the biggest armful he could manage, and was just about to dust his hands when Uncle, who was still setting up the forge, told him they needed even more branches. Clain almost protested to say that he had brought a lot, but caught himself just before, and pushed the complaint out of his mind to set on the work. Just to be safe, he brought back 2 more armfuls before stopping. Uncle barely seemed to notice. Clain stood until his uncle finished the forge. The billows were already in place, Uncle pumping it to stoke the flame, and many of the branches had been ignited in the smelter, burning brightly with ease. "Nephew," Uncle said without turning from the smelter, "I'll need the anvil soon. Lift it over here while I continue to stoke the fire. You're not going to help me? Even as Klein asked, he felt to be a child speaking the words. But how could he lift an anvil on his own? Strong as he was, he had never seen any man do that. If I do, the work will take far longer. But I can help you, if you're not strong enough. Klein twisted at the accusation. He did not want the work to take longer, but was he strong enough to lift an anvil? He walked to the cart to find out. He was pleased to see that the anvil taken was not so big as most. He did not even stop to think that perhaps his uncle had lifted it up into the cart all on his own. The boy puffed up his chest, tightened his grip, and lifted with all his might. To his surprise, the anvil came up with him. He held his breath and his strength, and waddled with the incredible weight of the iron all the way over to where his uncle stood. Feet apart, he set down the anvil, and at last took a well-deserved breath. He smiled widely, and proudly patted the thick muscle of his arm. But Uncle did not even look at him as he spoke. Get me also the little box in the back, the one that rattles. It has the ore in it. Saddened, but not defeated, Klein did it as he was told. At least that was easy to lift. This is nearly ready, Uncle said. Only now I need the water for the quenching. I'll go get it, Uncle, Klein said, turning away. To his surprise, Uncle stopped him with a word. Actually, let me go get it. You stay here. That was strange. Uncle always had him do the heavy work, just like Father and the others in the village. Klein's tired mind worked and worked to understand, finding no good reason for this new command. Are you sure, Uncle? Don't you want me to at least help you lift the water barrel? Don't be daft, boy. The barrel's too heavy, and we won't need the whole thing. This is no sword we're making. We only need a bit of shallow water. The pail will do. Uncle pointed back to the forge. Make sure the fire stays hot. That made much more sense, but strangely, Klein did not feel quite so satisfied. He turned the matter over in his tired mind and could neither understand his own feelings or his uncle's thoughts. Even if it was only the pail, which really looked more like a wide bucket than any other pail Klein had seen, why not have him do it? After all, Uncle was already stoking the flame himself. Had he merely gotten tired from the heat and needed a small break? Klein wasn't sure. For that matter, he had never seen his uncle take a small break, certainly not so early in the day. Regardless, Klein obeyed, trying to put this strange notion out of his mind. He continued to pump the bellow, an exercise which reminded him just how strong he was. He felt another twinge of pride, but still his thoughts turned to his uncle, even as the man was pouring out their drinking water into the pail. It was indeed a shallow thing. Klein had noticed it at their journey's beginning, but did not think much of it then. Even now, he did not think it was to be used for quenching. What was it Uncle said? They were not making a sword? But then what were they making? Klein realized Uncle had never told him. Uncle, Klein called out between mighty strokes of the bellow, what is it you intend to make today? Some realization dawned on him even as he spoke aloud. It could not be very large if you're using such shallow water. Uncle still was not looking at him, even as he grabbed his tongs and his hammer and carried them inside the water of the old iron pail which was near as wide as Uncle's shoulders. There was something else Uncle grabbed, but it was small and not something Klein recognized. Uncle had not put it in the pail. Instead, he placed it on the backside of his belt with such a careful, practiced move, Klein wondered if Uncle had not merely adjusted his trousers. But no, Uncle had indeed put something there. Klein was sure of it. A mask, Uncle finally answered as he set down the pail, sloshing some of the water off to the side. That was even more strange. Uncle never had any fancy for masks or decorations. Through his thoughts, Klein felt as though he were being watched by some massive beast just outside his vision. Though even as fear fluttered in his belly, he could not turn away from his uncle. Why are you making a mask? Klein asked, trying and mostly failing to conceal his fear. His uncle, who was only leaning over the quench, would not look at him even as he spoke. Klein could not help but wonder if Uncle was avoiding his gaze. I keep having dreams. Before Klein could inquire further, his uncle went on. In a wood precisely as this, I am there, forging a mask of iron. When it is finished, it is unpainted. Yet the outside is white and the inside of it is black. Despite how clear the dream was, I did not think much of it the first night. But it persists. Every night since I dream of it. or I do not sleep at all. Klein scratched his head. Am I in your dream too, Uncle? But Uncle did not answer. He turned his sight back to the water pail and took out his tools, setting them aside. Klein was nearing ready to push for an answer when Uncle began to swirl his hand into the water. Then at last he looked at Klein. Nephew, he said with a voice as clear as day, I have lost my ring in the pail, but I cannot seem to find it with my old eyes. Could you come over and look in it for me? Again, Klein was set aback. The fear was rising in him without sense, but he was doing better at hiding it. Had Uncle been wearing a ring? His nephew did not notice. Are you sure it's in there? It's the only place it could be. Please, just come look. Klein felt as though something invisible was pulling him back, but he paid it little heed. The steps he took to join his uncle were heavy and slow. The short distance between the two seemed to be a mile long. Perhaps you should let me carry the pail then. That way you would not have lost your ring. Uncle nodded. Aye, perhaps I should have. He did not look at his nephew. Uncle did not move from his spot, and so Klein had no choice but to stand opposite of him before the pail. He looked down with care. He was sure his eyes were good, but... Uncle, there's no ring in here. Are you sure you lost it in the water? How did it even come off? Uncle sounded angry as he spoke. Yes, I'm sure. Look closer, boy. There's a dark ring. Its color matches the metal. Klein shot a look at his uncle. He knew better than to question those older than him. So he bent a knee to take a better look, his arms at the pail's sides, looking better down into the perfect, clear water. It was a swift and practiced move Uncle did. He grabbed the boy by the hair with one hand, and with the other pulled the little knife out from the back of his belt. The knife was sharp as sharp could get, and he cut the boy with ease, all the way from its front to the back where the uncle could feel it cut the neck bone. The boy jolted but could not scream. He managed only a gurgle of pain. His muscles tensed, but his uncle was far stronger, and shoved the hair of his head down into the water, where it began to cloud with the boy's red blood. The child's ears were down past the water's line as he struggled in vain for life, but still Uncle spoke to the boy as if he could hear. Sorry, nephew. The boy kicked and tossed, but only for a moment, and then he began to grow still as the life drained from him. At last, the struggle ceased, and the boy's strong arms went limp. Uncle kept both his grips for some time, despite having seen himself act in the dream, despite knowing what he had to do. It was still a strange thing. He wondered if he would once again wake at any moment, but the warm blood of the knife soaked into his hand and reminded him of the reality. Eventually, he let go of the boy's hair. He would have liked to leave him undisturbed, but he knew he still had to quench the mask in forging, so he kicked the boy carefully away so as not to disturb the bloody concoction the two of them had made together. The boy's eyes were still open, looking up to the strange tree's crowns with dead awe. His uncle could not bear to look upon what was left of him, so he instead ignored him as he went about his work. The forge's fire seemed to grow cold far too quickly, so every other moment Uncle found himself working the bellows until he could feel the heat again. The work itself was as short as a blink, and as long as a day, all at once. The iron melted well and fit the clay mold which he had effortlessly carved before this gruesome journey began. It was not his design, of course, but it had only taken a single try to match the dream's design. When he first looked upon it, he knew what was to come was unavoidable, so he set out as swift as possible to get it over with. As he hammered the mask with careful blows, he found himself thinking of Klein, whom he had known since the lad was born. He had liked Klein. He had always liked Klein. The boy had been stupid from the first, but he had been a charming and hard-working boy, one that was not so much a lout as most others Uncle had met. His eyes watered and fell upon the red-hot iron of the mask to be, but not even the blindness of tears could stop him from working. He continued to mallet the iron of the mask until something within him told him it was ready. The mask was far from smooth, but it had been a perfect replica of the dream, right down to the exact same dents in its chevron face. With his tongs, he quenched the iron in the blood and water, trying his hardest not to look at what remained of the boy, but always seeing him in the corner of his eyes. The sizzle of the work hissed and burned with steam. When at last he raised it from the quench, he looked upon it and saw that the colors had come to pass all on their own. The outside was white, the, the inside was black. And though the design was simple, it was indeed one face on the outside and an entirely different face on the inside. His attention was drawn away from the mask only when he felt a heat at his neck. Despite his sweat, he had not noticed that all around the sacred wood was burning, the trees alight in a sea of fire, the flames at every trunk swallowing their all. He did not quite know how it went unnoticed, but he knew that he was the cause of it, that somehow his billows had breathed the sparks of this great blaze. This had not happened in his dream, yet he knew it was all a part of what was meant to occur. The mule and his cart were long gone. The boy was dead. Uncle thought he might be so lucky that the flames would devour him with the forest so that he might be forgiven for doing such an awful work. But as he closed his eyes with awaiting death, a new and wordless thought occurred. He opened his sight to find a path amidst all the burning. It was then he realized his work was not yet done. The body of his nephew he left, and slowly it was devoured with the flames, the boy's dead eyes watching the trees and the sky until they were blinded by the ash. All right. Well, I hope you're all smiling. So, that took me like 18 minutes to read. I missed a couple words here and there. Also, I just now noticed like a little inconsistency at the beginning. Klain asks if they're permitted to work here, and then in the next paragraph it says that he realizes that what does it say? He realizes that this is their destination from the beginning. So like he knew that they were going to work there, but he didn't realize that was their destination, which is kind of an inconsistency. Maybe that's why it got rejected. But yeah, that's my short story. I don't have like a lot of. I have a few stories where I'm like, yeah, that's okay. This is the only one where I feel kind of proud of. I'm glad you like it, Kimmery. I know Shelby likes it for some reason. But yeah, that story has gotten rejected twice, and I had thought about like, because it's almost like a horror story, because it's like, you're not really sure if the uncle's going crazy or if, or whatever. So it's got kind of a horror element to it, but so like when I was looking for places to submit it to, most of them were like, we don't do horror stories or we don't do things like that. And I only saw 2 publications where I was like, well, these are the only 2 I think would accept my story, and both of them rejected it. I I like how it turned out, but yeah, I don't know. So there is the precursor to it. There is Silence Prevails, which Shelby has not heard. It's okay, Shelby, I forgive you. This one was first, and this is longer. I also don't think it's as good personally. I can read it, obviously. I guess I might as well, because Shelby's been begging me to read it. But like I said, this one's not as good. So I'll give you a little backstory of this one. When I was how I came up with this story was I read a short story by the guy that wrote Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin. He used to just write short stories primarily, and he wrote one called um, the ice dragon, and it's kind of like it starts off as this fantastic story about this little girl who she's like distant, like her skin is cold to the touch and her hair is like pure white or something like that. And every winter, when winter is about to begin, the ice dragon comes down, and in the middle of it, comes to see her specifically. And like the ice dragon is the only thing she feels a connection to. And she loves the snow, like she never feels cold, and she spends hours out in it. Um, and it seems very fantastical and very whimsical until towards the end, when it kind of takes a 180, where there's this like pretty graphic scene where her father gets nailed to the wall by his hands, while the soldiers take turns raping her sister. You know, family fun. And so like I read it and I really like the short story. It's one of his better ones, and I think it's even being made into like a mini series or something. Um, which is why I was curious about it. Yeah, and like, and I'm okay with dark fantasy. Obviously, I mean, I just wrote a story about an uncle that killed his nephew in cold blood. But like when I read that and I saw that 180, it was just this complete tonal shift. And I was thinking, I was like, I bet. I was thinking about it. I was like, if I were to write a story similar to this about soldiers coming into a homeland and doing these terrible things, I would start it off as dark. And I kept thinking about it. And that was how I came up with the idea for this story. And then because I came up with this story, which is Silence Prevails, I ended up coming with the backstory to that after the fact, which is that other story, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And of course, Blood, Sweat, and Tears ended up being much better. Who's your celebrity lookalike, Kimmery? Emilia Clarke. She is a very lovely lady. She is like older than she looks too, which is kind of surprising. Like in the show, she's supposed to be like 17 or something, and she pulls it off, but like she's like 30, which is amazing. Anyways, so this is technically the original story. Like I said, I don't think it's as good. I think it's a little less focused, and there's a certain, I don't even know what you call it, but I just feel like I feel like making it Blood, Sweat, and Tears is better. No comment. But Shelby keeps bothering me, and since we're on about it, I might as well read it. This story is even worse. Like, um, Blood, Sweat, and Tears is very personal. Like, it's just this uncle who's like not sure if he's going mad or if he's actually fulfilling some kind of divine purpose or if it's some cruel trick or whatever. He doesn't know, and at that point he doesn't care. This story's different. No, it doesn't bother me, Shelby. It doesn't bother me. The only thing about this is that, like I said, I don't think it's as good. And I was hoping to go back through it and redo it and see if I could make it sound better. I haven't gotten around to that because I was busy writing my novel. And oh, did I mention? I guess you did. But I say bothering. That's just a figure of speech. I don't mean like I. It doesn't annoy me, but yeah. Anyways, I promise it doesn't bother me that you're excited to read my stories. I appreciate that. Anyways, I don't know if I mentioned, but I did finish the second draft of my novel. It's like 180,000 words, I think, at least so far. But I'm not sure if these stories play into it. But anyways, so I'm gonna read this. It's a story called Silence Prevails. It's not as good, but I'll read it. So don't say I didn't warn you. Okay. Their advance had come over the hill, each man a black spot upon the horizon as they traversed down to the village. They were fully armored, their faces hidden by masks of steel, and each man carried weapons which were marked by scuffs and scratches, bits of rust, each blade and blunt raised and ready for the fighting. Most had already cleared their homes by then, but not Johannes. He had not expected the advance to be so soon, or perhaps he had simply lost his days by drinking. Either way, he and the other remnants panicked at the sight. Many more simply ran away. Dirk, the woodsman, he came out swinging a battle-axe left over from his days of fighting. He would have hit the soldier had the man not simply pulled his head back with cool timing. After the second swing, Dirk's yelling was interrupted by the soldier's sword piercing his belly. The bleeding blade was removed with a sickening squelch, and then the soldier merely walked calm as spring into Dirk's house while he lurched over, bleeding on the dirt, making it mud, watching his own life slowly drain away from himself until at last there was nothing left to watch. Inside his house, his wife screamed but once in fear. This, too, was a sound cut off. Nobody ever saw her body. As for the others, none had the gall to try any more. The stronger ones were placed in irons, gathered and marched back over the same hill the soldiers came, never to be seen again. Johannes had expected to be placed among them, but instead he and his were corralled back into his father's home. The entire attack on their village was quiet, the soldiers' armor making more noise than the men wearing them. Even the people were silent, watching in awe as they tried to comprehend what was happening, what was going to happen. There was no ravaging, no raping, no screams or yells or calls for blood. From behind their blackened masks, Johannes swore he could feel their eyes piercing him. Johannes and his family, his wife, 2 sons, and beautiful daughter, all of them had been gathered into the kitchen at sword point. Nobody told them why. The only spoken words were "Move!" said only once with great force. That was the only thing they said until the family was all side by side in the kitchen. They were beside the long table, but not sitting at it. Johannes was about to ask a question when one of the knights removed his helmet, his mask coming off with it. This one was taller than the others, indeed, taller than most men, and skinnier too, even with his armor. His face was gaunt and sharp, his eyes deep to such that a certain light made him seem as though he had no eyes at all. He did not smile or laugh. He did not look upon them with any malice, any lust. From him there was only a gaze as cold as frostbitten iron. He was the only one to speak more than a single word, him leaning down to be face to face with the standing Johannes. The night smelled faintly of smolder. His voice was sharp, though not particularly loud. "Are there any others in your home?" he asked. Johannes could only shake his head, his jowls jiggling with the movement. The tall man tilted his head, but did not change his expression. "Are you sure? Answer wisely, or suffer for it." Johannes swallowed to destroy his fear. He had spoken true. There was none other in his home. "No, sir." The man's brow raised with curiosity, though his eyes seemed to sharpen. "You're not sure?" "No, sir," Johannes said, struggling with words. "I mean, I don't... There isn't... This is all of us." The man leaned closer. He slowed the pace of his words ever slightly. "Are you sure?" Johannes could not stand to look upon his eyes any more. He gave a single exaggerated nod while facing the knight's feet. "Yes, sir." The man looked upon him for a long time, then raised himself back to his normal tall standing. He very nearly reached the ceiling. "Very well." With that, he left the room. The man left the room, but did not bother taking his helmet. Its black finery set upon the long table, empty eye slits staring at them. 2 more soldiers kept swords aimed at the family. There was only more silence until his daughter, Yoruba, began to weep. His wife swept over to try and quell the girl, a move that made the soldiers rattle in their armor as they adjusted, their swords pulled back with taut arms as if to strike. Despite that, his wife only seemed to notice the threat when she had already made her move, clasping her daughter to her bosom, patting her brown hair, all braided and tied back to keep it from hanging. Despite their apparent nervousness, the soldiers made no further move. Johannes feared that they would perhaps jump between the two and pull them apart, or even just stab through them as they stood together, or worse. But aside from the muffled weeping of Johannes's young and beautiful daughter, the silence prevailed. Eventually the weeping stopped. Then it was a long day of silence. Johannes reflected inwardly that in all the silence he could only barely hear the sound of the knights outside. The soldiers inside still had their swords raised and ready, and they trembled not, as if they could continue their stance for eternity like armed statues. Nobody could find the courage to ask questions. No one except for Johannes's older, bolder son, Hodrik. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice almost managing to conceal its tremor. He had puffed his shoulders before he turned to face the knights. He was as large as any of them, even though his garment was thin. He raised his voice to a near boom. "What's taking so long?" "Be quiet!" the nearest soldier barked from behind his mask. If there was any fear in him, it was far hidden behind the mask, so deep within it would take a year to dig free. "What do you want from us? We are but farm folk. We hold no secrets here." "Be quiet!" The soldier's voice had been raised. It was not quite a boom, but it was louder than the boy's none the less. Johannes thought for a passing moment that the man's voice had not been muffled by his mask. Fool as Hodrik could be, even he did not tempt the soldier any farther. He looked upon him with the nastiest look his blue eyes could manage, and then he turned back around and shrunk. Johannes had not seen his boy so small in all his life, not even as a little child. Then the silence resumed. Across the table, a kitchen window revealed that the sun was setting on the village. The world's colors seemed to turn to an augur of red and orange that made the green grasses seem as though they were somehow aflame. Outside, the sound of the armored men in their walks neither increased nor decreased, but went on in a steady, constant pace. Exhausted, the family one by one fell to their knees on the floor, and one by one gave way to sleep, leaning upon one another. In the morning, the knights were still poised to strike, their swords raised and unchanged from the night previous. On the floor, Johannes and his family remained sitting, only moving to shift their legs into more comfortable positions. His family refused to look up from the floor. Uraba seemed as though she wanted to continue weeping, but his wife continued to coddle and soothe her, thus keeping further tears from falling. The sun had been up for some time when the tall knight returned. He did not bother to take back his helmet or even to touch it. Indeed, he gave it no attention. For that matter, he did not look at any family member. Instead, he stood by the wall, arms folded and watching as 3 more knights came in and began to root around the kitchen storage, taking all the foodstuffs and setting it on the table in piles. At the sight of it, Johannes and his family began to realize just how hungry they had become. It was a long and thorough search indeed. Johannes did not even realize his home had ever had so much food in it. Perhaps it was merely hunger, but never had any meal looked so good in Johannes in his life. The soldiers took out a length of good sausage, 3/4 of a wheel of cow cheese, herbs taken by the root from his wife's garden, loaves of bread at least a day old, his chickens laid out dead upon the table but still feathered, and with them an armful of eggs, a mostly full barrel of flour, a steel jug of cow milk, and worst of all, they so easily found the dozen bottles of spirits beneath his floor, hidden there within the cool, damp soil. Those were always his favorite, and he nearly wept to see another man take them away. While on this table, the 3 searching knights left the room without a word. Only then did the tall knight move from his place. He unfolded his arms and took a close inspection of all their spoils. Johannes swallowed with hunger. Inwardly, he begged for a bite to eat, but made no attempt to speak for fear of ruining his chances. Without even looking at him, the tall knight took a length of sausage and cut it from the rest with his dagger, a blade as thin as its master, its simple design tarnished by a number of nicks and chips that did not seem to damper its sharpness, writing on its edge that Johannes could not quite see, though he was never much for reading. The knight bit off the very end of the sausage, his face no longer lacking in expression as he chewed and chewed with joy, severing what must have been an incredible flavor. Johannes caught himself leaning forward, his mouth ajar and drooling. His family was doing likewise. Still, the knight paid no attention to any of them. He looked at nothing in particular until he lowered the sausage to the table, cutting off with slow precision a slice of meat almost paper thin. This, too, he savored with every bite. He did it again and again until Johannes had at last had enough of the sight. Hunger had overtaken the man when the knight was almost halfway through the sausage. "Sir, Be quiet!" The tall knight's voice had not been diminished by his mouthful. He chewed and he chewed and he chewed, cutting off new pieces now and then, much to the family's agony. Never before had such a ghastly face displayed such joy. Johannes searched within himself for the right words to say which would permit some mercy, and found nothing. He had never been good with words. His son, Hodrick, had done most of the talking for him, and he was a fool. So instead they continued to watch and listen, for the chewing was all the fixation of their ears. After a long while, the tall knight finished the sausage, and then he left. Behind the family, the soldiers still kept their weapons raised and pointed them with menace as Johannes watched the tall knight leave. They did not so much look upon the food, nor did they move beyond their guarding place. The silence prevailed. Again, the flames of sunset basking the world in wartime colors. Again, the family fell asleep, leaning upon one another. Another day came, and the food was still upon the table. It looked as grand as it had the previous day. Johannes nearly forgot his captivity, and just about stood to make himself a morning meal. He only had to adjust his foot, and the soldiers reacted, seemingly realizing his attention, and he could hear the sharpness of their blades as they were readied behind him. He made no further move. He could feel himself growing weaker, but what could he do? He could only wait in the silence. Eventually the tall knight returned. Another sausage link he took, one just like the first, and he chewed and chewed and chewed. Every new bite released a vivid smell of its cured meat into the nostrils of the family. The scent of something so divine was making them all weak. Still he chewed. He looked at no one and said nothing. Again, he left when he finished his little meal. Again, the sun set in its grisly colors, and the family slept upon one another. Again another day of this continued. The soldiers stood with their pointed swords, never moving from their spots, never looking away from the family. Again the tall knight came. This time he delved into the cheese as well, pairing it with the sausage, the scent of meat and cheese wafting through the air with such strength it caused Johannes's eyes to water. That's when the silence was broken. His younger son, Plick, jolted from the floor and wept openly. He was always a crier, that one. I cannot take it any more. His hands covered the river of his eyes, to no avail. I am so hungry. At long last the tall knight ceased his infernal chewing. He turned to look upon the boy with those deep dark eyes of his. The knight stood as tall as a tower, yet somehow he was contained beneath the roof. Do you wish to eat, boy? Plick's head slumped down, and with it his hands. He could not stand to look at anything, not even the food. I am so hungry, he said amidst sobs. The tall knight, though he once stood half a room away, twisted himself to the boy, raised the chipped knife, the same which he had used to cut the food. Long arms held out its wooden handle to the younger son. The knight spoke with a voice warm and biting. Cut someone down, and you can eat. The boy raised his weeping eyes to the knife. He had never been much of a fighter. Still, without hesitation, he took hold of it, looking upon it with a twisted joy, as if it were a child of his own. He cradled its steel to his face and smiled. His eyes dried in that instant, and he twisted around to face his family. They were all too weak to defy him, too hungry, too uncertain. Each of them was shivering in the warmth of spring. The skinny boy's lurching steps were loud as thunder as he approached, his arm limp at his side, save for the one carrying the long, thin blade. He raised it high above his head, and slammed it down into the ear of Hodrick, the brother whose head was bowed for fear of what was to come. The dagger, thin as it was, pierced well from the angle, but did not kill the older son, though he bled from the wound profusely, the dark scarlet fountain of his ear worsening as the blade was removed. Behind Plick, the tall knight smiled. Good, good. You may eat. Smiling faintly, as if half dead, the boy took a sausage for himself and ravaged into it as if he had never before eaten. He did not bother to cut. It was gone in a few bites. His tears returned with joy. May I have another? He asked sweetly, as if the knight were an old friend. One with cheese? You may. The knight's smile was sickening to look upon. If you cut again. Gladly the boy turned back to his older brother, who was shrunken and withered by the wound, his face soaked by a sanguine river. Again the boy stabbed, this time landing in the side of the neck. Again, 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 again. Eventually Hodrick gurgled his last and lay stone dead on the floor. You may eat, said the tall knight. The boy devoured 4 of the sausage, and nearly a quarter of the cheese when he at last seemed sated. He patted his flat belly with satisfaction and leaned up with renewed strength. Then he spoke again. May I have some more? He asked, raising a pointed and bloody finger to the bread. You may, the knight said, not moving from his spot. If you cut again. The boy lurched over to his mother. She was still cuddling the pretty Uraba, though now it was the older who buried her face in the younger, seeking comfort and refuge, finding neither. Son, Johannes called out, and because of this he could hear the night's blaze being raised behind him. Please stop. He was weeping, though he didn't feel like he was. Please stop. But Plick did not stop. He did not even seem to hear. He stabbed his mother into her shoulders, upon her back, into the arms that lay dead and limp. 100 times he stabbed. The blood was pooling beneath them. At some point, Uraba began to cry again, every bit of soul within her calling out in agony and despair, her voice withering in starvation. Plick did not seem to hear, nor did he seem to notice that in his fury he had wounded his dear and beautiful sister too. Lurching, he stood from the body and gorged himself on bread. He ate a dozen loaves, yet still they remained on the table, piled as high as ever. He poked a finger at the bottle of spirits. His finger had been broken from the careless stabbing, though he did not seem to notice. He could not bring himself to speak. Instead he let out a weak little groan, but the tall knight understood. You may, he said, if you cut again. Johannes could no longer bring himself to look upon the boy. The sound was plenty enough. Uraba's screams were gouged by a knife which had been plunged deep into her throat. The air was thick with the meaty sound of the stabbing, the distant sound of guards patrolling, and the silence which prevailed. Johannes felt himself collapse, though he might faint. He thought he might faint, but he found the agony was not so merciful. He stayed awake, but broken without so much a wound. The boy stood from his bloody mess and walked to the table where he grabbed a bottle of spirits, and he drank and drank and drank. For all his thirst, the bottle would not be emptied. Despite this, after a time, the boy dropped the bottle, its bitter spirits pouring out infinitely, as he grabbed yet another bottle with his knife hand, throwing his head back in wild thirst. When this bottle, too, was dropped, the boy lurched about with great drunkenness. His head swiveled about, and he did not seem to have his bearings. At his feet the liquor pooled with the blood, and every step he gave splashed about as if he were a child playing in a pond. The mixture was soaking into Johannes's knees and shins. Defeated, his head drooped to the floor. He could taste the mixture as it rippled to his lips. He did not have the strength to drink. The boy Plick looked at the tall knight, and said not a word. Johannes did not see that his younger son had grown a look of sorrow on his bloody face. You may, said the knight. The pace of his words had slowed down. If you cut again. Plick splashed over with every step to his father. The strike was singular, with plenty of strength, yet devoid of pleasure. He struck deep into his father's backbone, and the knife stuck. He twisted and wrangled until the vertebrae popped, giving the blade room enough to be freed. Then only Plick remained. He looked again at the tall knight and spoke with all soberness. I'm hungry, he said, and thirsty. The tall knight pointed to the table, which was filled with food and drink. The helmet was nowhere to be seen. You may eat, on one condition. You must cut someone down. Confused, the boy looked about the room, trying to find another wound to make. From his standing he looked at each corner and saw none other. He could look back to the tall knight, and the tall knight looked at him. Then the boy dawned with realization, nodding with understanding. Without hesitation, the boy took the knife and drove it up through his own chin, his tongue, his skull. The impact of his own hand rattled his brain. And in the last moment he stumbled to the table, fell at its edge, and reached desperately for the sausage link. Though they were all within reach, his grab found nothing. Then he fell to the floor. The tall knight stood watching with arms folded. In the far corners, 2 of his soldiers stood likewise. Behind their steel masks the tall knight could sense a look of fear upon them. Between the 3 of them lay the bloody carnage of the family. Their middle child, a boy, half a man yet not so old as to shave, had been the last to die and the first to kill. With his last he had reached up over the table. All 3 had guessed he was reaching for the helmet, perhaps having figured out its secret, but instead he reached past it and grasped at something that wasn't there before finally giving out. He had done himself in with the knife their commander had laid out in the beginning. The floor was thick with blood and bits of flesh strewn about in the carnage. The room was silent. Nobody said a word until another soldier came in from the outside, shaking his head at the sight, doing his best to maintain the standard dignity. Bloody hell! I'll never get used to that. The tall knight walked over to the long table, his modest steps loud in the face of the silence, his boots sticky with the drying pools of blood. He grabbed his helmet and looked deep into its black and empty eyes. The soldier pulled himself away from the sight of the dead family to ask his tall commander, a question. Did they give you any information, sir? The tall knight shook his head. They knew nothing. I suspected as much, but I had to be sure. He gestured to the boy, who still had the dagger in his chin. He was the only one to break. If any of them knew anything, it would have been something different. He looked up to the soldier. Have there been any problems rounding the rest of the villagers together? The subordinate shook his head. No, sir. They've been quietly gathered into their homes. Except for the fellow with the axe, of course. And his wife. Cannot be helped. What happened to her? I went in and made sure of it. She's dead, sir, and the men have not touched her body, not even to adjust her. The tall knight nodded. Good. Let the enemy deal with such savagery. We'll continue on with clean hands. The soldier saluted. Rightly so, sir. I take it you'll be visiting the rest of the families? Again he nodded. I shall. If the numbers I saw are correct, we shall be done with all of them before sunset. Very good, sir. I await your orders. And with that, the subordinate left. The tall knight shifted his helmet around to put it on before speaking to the two knights in the room with him. Search this house for food. Gather everything that's usable. Between his words, he donned his helmet and its mask once again. Then burn this house to the ground. The men nodded and set to work without a word, just as they had been trained. The tall knight went back to the younger boy. He had to fight the urge to close the corpse's eyes for him. Instead, he placed a hand on the shoulder and with the other pulled the dagger free. It had been so well jammed he feared the boy might have bent the tip, but the knife came out no worse for wear. He cleaned its steel with a spot on the boy's shirt that it was still free from blood. When the blade was clean once again, he took note of the familiar words engraved upon its edge. Silence prevails. Satisfied, he did not bother to put the blade away, instead keeping it at hand for use by the next family. Don't you just love happy endings? So that was my idea, because like that original story, the Ice Dragon, was like kind of nice at first, and then it turns really dark, and I was like, I'd start off dark and then just make it worse. And so that was my idea of it. But you can kind of understand why I'm a little reluctant to share that one. A, because it makes me seem like a sadist, and B, because it's not as well written as Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But the idea was that the mask is magical, and that in kind, I decided to write a story to explain why the mask is like that. And so I wrote that story, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, to try and explain what the mask was. But that Silence Prevails, the first one, that's a first draft. And so like I didn't have that story in mind to begin with. So part of me like wanting to go back over it is to correct it, make it match up, because I wrote that all the soldiers are wearing masks, and I didn't really describe the tall knight's mask. If I ever have the chance, I'm going to describe the tall knight's mask as being the same as the one in Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But that's low priority because I don't think that story is that good. Like I don't mind it as like a frame for reference. I think it's quite bloody and it doesn't really have a moral. It's more just like it's almost like a ghost story, But like I said, it's not as good. But right now the priority is school, and then if I ever have downtime, sometimes I like to do a bit of writing. But so far I haven't really had a whole lot of chance because I've been spending a lot of time writing essays and doing homework and all that stuff. I've just been trying to stay on top of it. Well, thank you, Shelby. That's nice to hear. Copy and paste. Should I just copy and paste the whole thing and pretend that they're one story? I actually don't mind writing essays. I just hate like citations because like they're always so specific. They're like, oh, it has to be in Chicago format, it has to be in MLA, or it can't be in this format. In my original history class before I had to transfer out, the professor was like, the professor is like, I don't actually care what your citations are as long as I understand them. He's like, yeah, I don't care what the standard is as long as I understand the source and where it comes from. And I was like, that's awesome. I've never heard of a teacher doing that. But this other one, I had to transfer out of that class, of course, because it's too good to be true. And the class I ended up in, he's like, it has to be Chicago. But his class, I think, is generally easier, so I shouldn't complain. Oh well. So that was the Mask uh, twofer. The original story came second, and the origin story came first. But it was actually funny. Like the other day, I woke up before school, I think, and like I just had this. I had been kind of thinking about this story, and I don't want to share it because I'm not ready for it. Because it's not a short story. It's like an actual like story, like a maybe a novel or something. But I had this. I've been mulling over this idea for a story, and so like one morning I just woke up and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna start writing some of that so I don't forget it. And I thought I'd just write like a couple words, and I ended up writing a few paragraphs. So that's fun. I wish it was easier for me to write short stories, but I find that I'm very loquacious and I just yeah, I have a few novel ideas. They're just not very good. Like I can recognize that Blood, Sweat and Tears is better than most of my short stories. At least I think it is. The tricky thing is that like I've noticed that with a lot of artists, their most popular work comes from something that they did not expect to be popular. Like the book Fight Club. Uh, the book Fight Club, the guy originally wrote it to like gross out his editor. He wrote one chapter of it just to like get on his editor's nerves. And then as it turns out, his editor loved it. So he's like, "Yeah, finish writing this." So he ended up writing the whole book, and then that ended up being by far the most popular thing he's ever done. But so like part of me is like, well, I really like this idea, and I think it turned out great. And then the other part of me is like, should I just like throw science to the wall and see what sticks? Like, do I just need to just publish every crappy story I come up with and then let people sort it out for me? Probably not, because otherwise people are going to be like, wow, this guy's a serial killer telling all these stories about families killing each other. And I kind of noticed that with Blood, Sweat, and Tears and then Silence Prevails, that they're both about, I want to say fratricide, but that's not quite right. They're both about killing family members, and I was like, man, maybe I'm a little messed up. But some guys, like some authors, just make a living off of short stories, which I think is kind of cool. But I ended up like if I get an idea for a story and I really like it, it's so much longer than that. Although I think it's significant because that story was based on a short story, and then I in turn wrote a short story based on my own short story, and then that ended up being a pretty good short story. So it's short stories within short stories. So I'm in my mind, I'm like, I need to read more short stories or more books in general so I can like correct people. But so that's a story that I've never told anyone. It's not as good, but I'm glad you guys at least like at least one of my stories. One of these days, I will have more than one good short story to share, and probably within the next 20 years, I hope. But not today. So I've been streaming for like 2 hours now. I'm tired, but thank you both for coming. Appreciate your support. Yeah. Glad you enjoyed it. I'm gonna go to bed or something. Or something. I think you made that joke last week, Kimberly. But anyways, thank you both for coming. Have a good night. Bye bye.